It was the kind of drizzle that didn't quite soak your clothes, but still managed to blur your windshield, like the town itself was trying to hide what was really going on. Outside Sunrise Diner number 28, the familiar neon sign buzzed with the same faint hum as always. From the outside, everything looked ordinary. The door still chimed when it opened. The coffee still steamed behind the counter. The staff still moved in rhythm, as if nothing had changed. But inside one parked truck just across the lot, a man sat still, watching, thinking, waiting. His name wasn't Walt Simmons, though that was the one stitched onto his flannel shirt. His walk had a subtle limp, his baseball cap sat low over his brow, and the toast he'd grabbed from the gas station across the street was still untouched on the seat beside him. He hadn't come for breakfast. Not really. He'd come for something else. And today, he wasn't showing up as himself. Not yet. Because today, Jackson Reeves, CEO and founder of Sunrise Restaurant Group, wasn't here to be served. He was here to see what others had chosen to ignore. For months, something hadn't felt right. The numbers said one thing: profits up, performance above target. But employee turnover at this particular location was the worst in the region. HR dashboards don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth either. So Jackson had come in disguise to test a theory he'd once taught his earliest managers. You want to know if a restaurant's healthy? Don't ask the GM. Watch how the staff pours coffee at 7 a.m. So he stepped out of the truck, pulled his hat down, and walked into Sunrise Diner 28. No one looked up. No one greeted him. Only the soft ding of the doorbell acknowledged his presence. He slipped into a booth in the back, quiet and low profile, with a perfect view of the room. That's when he saw her, Cassie. She wasn't flashy. Her apron was clean but faded. Her sleeves were slightly frayed. Her pace wasn't rushed but purposeful. While others drifted between tasks, Cassie moved like every step meant something. And when she approached with a tray, coffee, toast, 2 mini packets of jam, she set it down so gently it didn't make a sound. Black coffee and toast, she said softly. I added butter and jam, just in case. Jackson nodded, murmured a thanks, then casually asked, Busy morning, huh? Guess the tips aren't bad at this hour. Her answer came in a whisper, almost lost beneath the hum of the espresso machine. Morning shifts are the worst for tips, she said, especially when we split them. But only a few actually get anything. The words came out like fact, not complaint. But for Jackson, they hit harder than they should have. A single sentence, a single crack in the surface. That was all it took. What he didn't know, what she didn't know, is that those few words would unravel something much bigger. Behind the counter, a system was humming. But it wasn't built for fairness. It was built for silence. And that silence was about to end. Cassie moved like she'd been on her feet for years. Not with speed, but with rhythm. Controlled, grounded, focused. Her steps were purposeful, her posture steady, her eyes scanning tables like someone memorizing a pattern no one else could see. She didn't speak unless necessary, didn't joke with coworkers, didn't stall by the counter. She moved through the room like clockwork, a quiet anchor in the middle of a drifting storm. Jackson watched her from his booth in silence. It wasn't just her effort that caught his attention. It was the contrast. Around her, the other staff were inconsistent, moving like they were just going through the motions. One of them, a young man with perfectly slick-back hair and a crisp uniform, leaned against the POS terminal. His name tag read, Tyler. Beside him, another employee, older, bulkier, arms crossed, stood by the register but didn't move toward any tables. His tag said Chase. Neither of them carried trays. Neither of them poured coffee. They didn't seem tired, just uninvolved. Jackson took a sip of the coffee Cassie had brought him. It had already gone cold. Not because it had sat too long, but because the moment Cassie whispered about the tips, his mind had snapped into place. Only a few actually get anything, she'd said. Like it was just how things were. Like she didn't expect it to be different. He kept watching. Cassie cleared a table near the window, refilled a mug at table 6, dropped off another plate at table 9. She did it all with a flow that made it look effortless, though Jackson knew it wasn't. Then she passed his booth again, collecting a dirty saucer. He spoke softly, keeping his eyes on the tabletop. Why don't you swipe the payments yourself? Cassie didn't stop walking, but her voice dipped lower as she leaned in, her fingers brushing the edge of the plate. I don't have access, she said. Only certain roles can process payments. If you're not assigned one, you don't get digital tips either. Jackson looked up for a moment, catching her eyes. What role are you assigned? Supplemental staff. She almost smiled, but it wasn't humor. It was a resigned irony. Basically the invisible list. He didn't blink, just followed her gaze as it drifted subtly toward the counter. Behind it stood a man with a too-clean button-down and a too-polished grin. He was laughing with a customer, posture relaxed, pen clipped neatly into his chest pocket like a manager fresh from a training manual. Brad, she whispered, he's the one who sets up the POS rolls. Jackson didn't need to ask who Tyler was. Cassie told him anyway. His nephew, she added. Always has the morning shifts, always has full access. Something in Jackson's jaw shifted, a tension that didn't show in his tone, but pulsed in his silence. He'd spent years designing a system that was meant to be transparent, role-based permissions, equal splits, digital receipts, access logs. It was all supposed to protect against exactly this kind of manipulation. But this wasn't a flaw in the code. It was the code being rewritten quietly behind closed doors. Cassie reached into her apron then, not for a pen, not for an order pad, but for a small, thin notebook. The cover was curled at the corners, edges soft from wear, spine bent like it had been opened 100 times and never once thrown away. She didn't hand it to him right away. She just held it for a moment, like she was still deciding whether it was safe. I didn't want to complain, she said, eyes low. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. Then she passed it to him. Jackson opened it carefully. Inside were pages of notes, dates, table numbers, total bills, the POS displayed tip, and beside each a separate column, what Cassie actually received. Red pen circled the discrepancies. Notes in the margins added context, names, times, observations, a quiet, methodical journal of an invisible theft. It's not an accusation, she said, almost apologetic. It's just the only way I could be sure. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Every detail in the notebook aligned with what he'd just seen. Cassie doing the work. Tyler standing by the screen. Payments being funneled quietly, consistently, through a system that only some were allowed to touch. This wasn't negligence. It was design. Someone had created lanes of visibility, then placed people like Cassie in the blind spots. I've lost more than $600 this month, she added softly. But what hurts more is no one ever asked who's dividing it, or how. Jackson closed the notebook, not with haste, but with care, like it was something sacred, because to him, it was. Not just proof, but truth, the kind that doesn't show up on spreadsheets, the kind that never gets written into performance reports, the kind that lives at the bottom of chipped ceramic mugs and gets buried beneath the phrase, "That's just how it is." He didn't know exactly when it happened, when the shift took place inside him, but by the time he looked up again, he wasn't just watching anymore. He was seeing. The signs had been there for months. The turnover rate, the disengagement scores, the rising profits hiding a quiet rot underneath. He just hadn't looked closely enough. Cassie stepped away to grab another tray, and that's when Jackson moved. He pulled out his phone, angled the notebook discreetly, and began snapping pictures, page after page, each red circle, each scribbled timestamp. He needed evidence, not just instinct, and now, finally, he had both. He took a sticky note from his wallet, scrawled something in block letters, and slipped it into the notebook's front cover. Keep documenting. Don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return. Then he slid the notebook back across the table, hiding it behind his coffee cup just as Brad walked past, disappearing into the back office. Timing, Jackson thought. Everything came down to timing. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught motion by the POS terminal. Tyler, still there, was no longer processing a payment. His fingers tapped the touchscreen like he was scrolling through something deeper. Not transactions, settings. Jackson leaned slightly, just enough to see one word flash across the top of the screen. User role settings. He didn't need more. This wasn't favoritism. It wasn't a one-off mistake. It was infrastructure, twisted, reprogrammed, and hidden in plain sight. And Cassie, the woman no one listened to, the one quietly written out of the records, had just handed him the one thing no audit ever could. A paper trail that refused to disappear. By the time Jackson Reeves walked out of Sunrise Diner 28 that afternoon, the rain had stopped. But something heavier had started inside him, A storm not of weather, but of certainty. He didn't glance back at the glowing sign. He didn't need to. What he'd seen in that booth, what Cassie had handed him, was already rewriting everything he thought he understood about the system he built. He waited until he was in his car. Then he made the call. "Mara," he said, voice low but steady, "we have a problem." He didn't need to explain. Mara Lynn had been with Sunrise for 7 years, head of internal investigations, quiet, brilliant, unflinching. She'd taken down 3 embezzlement rings in the last 4 years alone, and not with public drama, but with precision. She didn't ask for context. She simply said, "Understood." And the gears began to turn. Within the hour, the POSOS terminal at Sunrise Diner 28 was switched into silent audit mode, a hidden configuration reserved for only the most sensitive cases. It didn't interrupt daily operations. No alerts, no pop-ups, no signs to the staff. But every transaction, every role change, every override was now being logged line by line, an invisible mirror placed behind the screen, capturing everything. The diner continued functioning like nothing had changed. Brad stood by the counter laughing with regulars. Tyler leaned at the POS like a king on a throne. But the system was no longer theirs. Now it was watching them. The first findings came the next morning. Jackson met Mara before sunrise. She slid her tablet across the table, graphs, terminal access entries. He scanned them quietly but with growing intensity. Finding number 1. The POS system had been modified with a hidden access tier labeled Preferred Internal. This role wasn't visible on any of the public-facing permission screens. It didn't appear in the audit trail. It couldn't be changed without admin override, and even then, only under specific parameters. 3 accounts had this tier: Brad Coleman, manager; Tyler C., part-time server; kitchen support 03, an unassigned role with recurring login activity. Finding number 2. Over the past 30 days, the total digital tips across the branch had surpassed $4,800. Of that, 67% had been routed directly through Tyler C. But the service volume data painted a different picture. Tyler had served less than 15% of total tables. He wasn't just overcompensated. He was being systematically funneled money. Finding number 3. Payroll records showed a part-time employee named Marcus Hill clocked in for 21 of the last 25 mornings. But when Mara searched the HR system, Marcus didn't exist. No onboarding file, no tax forms, and the social security number tied to his account, already flagged 2 years ago at a different branch during an internal investigation that came up cold due to lack of proof. That branch had been managed by one person, Brad Coleman. It was all lining up like puzzle pieces that had been scattered across years and branches, finally converging under one roof. But it didn't stop there. Finance had uncovered something else. A shell company named Douglas Henderson LLC, registered out of state, had been receiving routine Friday payouts labeled as internal service logistics fees. The amounts? Identical to the discrepancies in the missing tips. The contact info listed on the business registration? Traced back to a now-deleted email address, one once used by Brad before his promotion to manager. Jackson leaned back, exhaling slowly. His jaw clenched, not from surprise, but from clarity. This wasn't favoritism. It wasn't some manager playing favorites. It was a rigged machine engineered to siphon value from people who couldn't fight back. And Cassie, who never raised her voice, never filed a complaint, had managed to document the exact shape of the invisible theft, page by page. Her notebook wasn't just a log. It was a blueprint, a forensic guide. The system that once erased her was now recording everything she'd endured. And now it was time to flip the mirror around. Jackson stood, pacing once, then stopped. "This isn't just a diner problem," he said. "This is the infrastructure, and it's being exploited from the inside out." Mara nodded. She was already a step ahead. "We've launched audit protocols across all 83 POSOS-connected branches," she said. "Any account with custom roles or non-verified logins will be flagged in real time. All ghost employees, all hidden tip reallocations, the whole network is under surveillance." Jackson didn't smile, but the fire behind his eyes sharpened. They weren't just cleaning up a mess anymore. They were uncovering a culture that had learned to hide in plain sight. Back at Diner 28, no one suspected a thing. Brad still strutted between booths, offering smiles like sugar packets. Tyler still tapped through the POS, confident no one could see what he was doing. But what they didn't know was that every keystroke was now being echoed on a remote server, every login preserved, every override traced to its origin. And Cassie, she was still there, still working the floor, still training a nervous new hire on how to flag allergy info or adjust order codes. She had no idea that by simply refusing to look away, she triggered a chain reaction that would expose fraud beyond her own branch. She wasn't the whistleblower in the traditional sense. She never made a speech, never confronted a manager. She just wrote things down, carefully, quietly, over and over. And in doing so, she forced the system to look back at itself and see the truth it had buried under roles and ranks and routines. By the end of the week, Jackson had seen enough. He didn't need to ask for more data. The case had built itself. Everything pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't an accident. It was architecture, a structure built to look neutral, but shaped to protect the wrong people. Now it was time to confront that structure, and the reckoning would start where the injustice began, at a counter, with a terminal, and a woman who refused to disappear. It was Friday, 9:06 a.m., peak hour. The air inside Sunrise Diner 28 carried the scent of buttered toast, reheated bacon, and the low hiss of a coffee machine working overtime. Orders were flying, plates were clinking, customers were chatting. On the surface, everything looked like a normal morning rush, but just beyond the rhythm of routine, the temperature in the room was about to change. The front door opened, not with the casual creak of a regular customer, but with the weight of something final. No flannel shirt, no baseball cap, no limp to sell the disguise. Jackson Reeves stepped through the doorway wearing a charcoal gray suit, the same one he wore when he cut the ribbon at Sunrise's 50th location. His back was straight, his eyes unreadable. Behind him came Mara Lynn, crisp, calm, and carrying a tablet glowing with the live audit feed from the Posos terminal. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was commanding. She didn't need to speak. The data was already doing it for her. The moment they entered, the diner fell silent, like someone had pulled the power cord from the background noise. Brad, mid-laugh with a customer, froze with a half-smile still stuck on his face. Tyler's fingers paused above the touchscreen. Even Chase, who had been carrying a carafe toward table 6, stopped mid-step. It was as if the air itself tightened. Jackson didn't raise his voice. "Good morning," he said, steady and quiet. "I won't take much of your time. Just the last 15 years I've spent building this company." He walked calmly to the front counter and placed his hand on it, firm, deliberate. "I once said fairness isn't a slogan," he continued. "It's a behavior, repeated every day. And today, we're going to start repeating the right one." Then he turned to Brad, and without even blinking, spoke the line that would erase all excuses. "You received 67% of the tips this month," Jackson said. "Not because you worked harder, not because you served more tables, but because someone gave you keys to a door that others weren't even told existed." Brad didn't reply. His expression shifted slightly, from confusion to fear to something that resembled defeat. Mara stepped forward and tapped her screen. 3 graphs appeared, mirrored on the tablet and quietly casting colored reflections across the countertop. The first graph, tip distribution by name. The second, unauthorized role assignments. The third, weekly payouts to Douglas Henderson LLC. There was no arguing with the numbers. They spoke louder than any voice could. Tyler opened his mouth, maybe to deny, maybe to explain, but Jackson silenced him with a glance. Not angry, just finished. Cassie stood in the far corner of the room, tray in hand. She didn't speak, but for the first time that day she stood upright. The trainee beside her looked up, confused at first, then suddenly alert. Behind them, a cook emerged from the kitchen, arms folded, watching, not hostile, just waiting, as if every single person in the diner had been holding their breath for this moment without even knowing why. Jackson turned again to Brad. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. Your records are being handed over to legal. Tyler, the same goes for you. There is no room here for people who turn transparency into a personal hustle." He scanned the room, eyes moving from one staff member to the next, not looking for guilt, but for something else, for recognition, for relief. "For the rest of you," he said, "if you've done the work, you will be seen, you will be paid. But if you've hidden behind smiles and loopholes, you'll be removed, no matter how long you've been standing at the register. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than that. The kind of silence that follows when the truth is finally spoken out loud, with names attached. The kind that marks the end of a lie that's been living too long. Then Jackson turned, slowly, to the Posos terminal. He pointed to it. "Starting today," he said, "this system will no longer be controlled by a privileged few." He scanned the room until his eyes landed on a young man in the back, nervous, wide-eyed, still holding a damp dish towel. "What's your name?" Jackson asked. "Ben," the young man replied, startled. Jackson nodded toward the terminal. "Ben, you're the first to use it under the new protocol." There was a pause. Then, cautiously, Ben stepped forward. The rest of the staff watched in stillness, in awe, as he logged into the system with his own ID for the first time. A barrier had been crossed. The line between the seen and the unseen no longer existed. Mara tapped her tablet again and pulled up a live dashboard. On it, green bars pulsed in real time, tracking tip shares across active shifts. Red dots blinked softly, flagging suspicious patterns elsewhere in the network. The audit wasn't stopping here. It had already begun across other branches. Tyler's name was gone from the POS interface. Brad's override credentials had been revoked. But the biggest change wasn't in the terminal. It was in the room. Cassie exhaled, not relief exactly, but something deeper, a release. The quiet letting go of a weight she'd been carrying for far too long. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Moments later, Emily, the new hire Cassie had trained just days before, stepped beside her and gently touched her arm. It was a small gesture, but human, clear. Silent acknowledgement that Cassie wasn't alone anymore. From the back, Brad emerged one final time. No protest, no defense. Just a long look toward Tyler. The faint, wordless nod between them wasn't an apology. It was an admission. The game was over. Tyler handed over his access card. Jackson didn't pocket it. He placed it flat on the counter for everyone to see. "No more manipulation. No more hidden titles," he said. "From now on, if you serve, you're seen. If you show up, you're counted." He stepped back. No applause followed. Just a quiet return to work. But now, the energy was different. Feet moved with purpose. Eyes met instead of avoiding. For the first time in a long time, the diner felt like it was waking up. Cassie walked past Jackson. She didn't look down. She met his gaze, steady and silent. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. They both understood. The reset had already begun. And this was the morning everything changed. 1 month later, the morning rhythm at Sunrise Diner 28 had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The scent of buttered toast and coffee still lingered in the air. The ceramic mug still clinked against tables, and the front bell still gave its gentle chime. But beneath the surface, something deeper had changed. There were no more whispered doubts in the break room. No more second-guessing whether tips were disappearing into the void. No more ghost logins. The POS system now displayed tips transparently in real time, tied directly to who served, not who happened to be standing closest to the screen. And the staff? They walked with a little more ease, stood a little straighter. Not because the job got easier, but because the system finally saw them. Cassie wasn't on the floor anymore. Not because she'd left, but because she'd risen. She'd been promoted, regional training lead for transparent operations. No more juggling 12 tables alone. No more silent sacrifices. Now she traveled from branch to branch, helping teams roll out the very same system that had once failed her. She didn't bring slide decks or corporate jargon. She brought her story. A quiet one. A steady one. The kind that doesn't preach, but proves. At Branch 42, a new hire named Nina sent her a message after her first shift. "Cassie, I just wanted to say thank you. The first time I saw my name on the tip screen, I cried. I didn't know I was allowed to exist." At Branch 17, a part-timer who had once quit returned, not for a raise, not for a title, just to be counted. "I don't need extra," she said. "I just want to not be erased." Back at headquarters, Jackson Reeves sat in his office reading the new monthly report. It showed a lot. Revenue growth, audit rollouts, turnover down by 18%. But that wasn't the line he underlined. It was the final question on the internal feedback form, added quietly, without announcement. "Do you feel seen at work?" There was no dashboard for that, no quarterly forecast. But Jackson knew that is what saves companies. Not slogans, not policies. People who feel seen. And now they were. On a quiet afternoon, Jackson returned to Diner 28. No announcement, no escort, no speech. He slipped into the same corner booth, the one where it all began. The light hit the table differently now. Less like it was hiding dust, more like it was finally allowed to shine. Cassie was near the counter, guiding new hires through their access logins. Calm, clear, composed. She didn't notice him at first. She didn't need to. Jackson didn't stay long. Before leaving, he tucked a folded $20 bill under his half-eaten pancake and slid a handwritten note beneath the plate. Thank you for writing it down when everyone else looked away. You're not alone anymore, and neither is anyone else. Cassie found it later while bussing the table. She didn't open it right away. She just exhaled softly and folded it like something she already knew by heart. That night, she opened her old notebook. The pages were worn, the ink smudged, but she didn't reread them. She didn't need to. Instead, she gently removed each page, placed them in an envelope, and sealed it. On the front, she wrote, "For whoever comes next, in case you need proof, you're not crazy." She left it on the desk of a new branch manager. No speech, no spotlight, just a quiet act of passing something forward. Because some stories don't end, they echo. And this one, this was only the beginning.